I have some great terrible neighbor stories for you today, and you're going to love the title story too. Here's our first one. Neighbor Tossing Garbage in My Backyard by Valuable Adagio 8283. For the past 2 years or so, my abhorrent neighbor has tossed garbage in my backyard, specifically beer bottles and cans. 2 years ago, we had a car that wasn't working and it was sitting in our driveway for some time. The neighbor, whom we had never conversed with before, left a note on our mailbox with their number to discuss the possibility of selling it to them. We ended up donating the car and not selling it to the neighbor, which was apparently an act of war. He began harassing us with profanity and text messages. We told him we do not want trouble and prefer to keep to ourselves in the neighborhood that we've lived in our entire lives. Still, no respect. Safe to say, we changed our number and never spoke again. At that time, the guy told me to cut my freaking trees. Unsure why, considering none of my trees are over his property and all of our surrounding neighbors have the same amount of trees plus at an equal distance. If leaves blow onto his pavement, big deal. I can't control what trees and nature do, and I certainly am not going to cut down any trees to appease to a rude neighbor. Honestly, the way I see it, our leaves blow into his pavement. They don't have a yard, so that must constitute garbage in my backyard. Great logic. Not a smart one over there. No trees are of danger or causing a nuisance, and again, none are hanging over anyone's property line. Only on my property. In the past, he came onto my property in the middle of the night and cut down an orange tree that was growing slightly over the fence line. The entire tree in my yard for me to cut up and haul to the curb for pickup. Additionally, the guy runs his car business out of the house and fixes them, revving engines during what should be quiet times of the day. We don't have an HOA, but deed restrictions state that you cannot run a business from your home. People come in and out looking at his vehicles that he's selling. This isn't even an issue to me, but coupled with the garbage, it's the cherry on top. We have not spoken since the car debacle, but occasionally beer cans and broken bottles will appear in my backyard, specifically over the fence that we, and only we, share, so there's no doubt that this is the guy who's doing it. I collect every piece of garbage in one trash bag that has grown over time, and I installed cameras around my home and I put up no trespassing because his adult family member forcefully opened my fence to get their ball, and no dumping signs all around my home to truly push the point home and to cover my butt if I ever involve the city. I have several videos of me picking up the garbage and showing the cameras. Unfortunately, these aren't 24/7 recording cameras and they only record when there's movement, so I've never caught the guy in the act. I'm fairly certain that this individual tosses them in my ditch as well from his car. I don't have a camera set up on the street, so this is difficult to capture or prove. The guy puts out his trash and recycling bins every week, so obviously there's a place to put the trash. My other neighbors are also not fond of him, but I unfortunately am the one who shares a fence. Constantly picking up beer cans and bottles also triggers memories of my mother who passed from the effects of alcoholism. I've seen the cops go over there a few times in the distant past, but nothing recently. Not to be a jerk, but the guy's probably an alcoholic with Napoleon syndrome. I have no desire to speak to or confront this person because nothing will change. My family lives in anxiety and fear and worry that calling the city or the police would just escalate or cause this person to retaliate. This is also a danger to my pets who roam the areas that the trash is being thrown. Sometimes my yard people accidentally run over the trash too. I don't even want to involve the city or authorities, but I don't know what else to do. Do I need video evidence of the guy throwing trash? If so, I'm looking at 24/7 recording cameras. I know many of you would say to just talk to him, but truly, I would want a police officer there to mediate. Again, I want peace, and involving the authorities or the city is the last thing I want to do, but it's gone on for far too long and is causing anguish and discomfort in my own home. The neighbor knows we won't retaliate because we're probably considered too nice or scared, and he's right, we don't want to confront. All we do is pick up the garbage and put it in the same bag we've been collecting it in. The neighbor has never confronted us since we changed our number, just keeps tossing the bottles over. Do you think that OP should get a lawyer for the tree too and have a paper trail? Let me know. A family's incompetence nearly killed me. Neighbors go nuclear. Posted by Severin. A few years ago, at the age of 22, I was diagnosed with epilepsy, which came out of the blue. In my appointments with the epilepsy nurse and my neurologist, I was informed, by way of informing those who were looking for a cause for my epilepsy, that I had suffered from measles when I was around 13 months old and was not yet fully vaccinated against it. Upon returning home, I spoke with my sister and remarked that I had never heard of this before. In private, my sister decided that, as it was me who was involved, I had the right to know what she knew of the story. However, she was only 8 years old at the time and was unsure of the true extent of what had transpired. The story she told me was as follows. Shortly after I was born, a family moved onto our street, and they had a son who was around my sister's age. My sister wasn't fond of him. He was a bit pushy, but not in an unkind way. He likely just wanted to make friends and pushed his way into playing with the other children. My sister, however, has an anxiety disorder and has had it for a long time, and she didn't really appreciate his behavior, finding him quite intimidating. She knew very little about his parents and has never actually spoken to them. About a year later, I came down with the measles and was rushed to the hospital with severe complications. My sister explained that, as far as she was aware, the family was opposed to vaccinations and believed the only way to build a, quote, natural immunity was to be infected with the virus. Now, this was before the falsified study linking vaccines to autism. As such, when their unvaccinated son contracted the measles, the first thing that they thought of was to do the other families on the street a favor and send their infectious son out to play with the other children without warning anybody. My sister inadvertently brought the virus into the house and we were both infected. She shrugged it off, but I wasn't so lucky. 21 years later, I would find out that this virus and the seizures that it caused at the time caused scarring in my brain that has left me with epilepsy and all of the joys that come with that. Lovely stuff. I returned from the hospital after an anticlimactic recovery, and a month later, the family disappeared. Until recently, that was all I knew of the situation. My parents were understandably traumatized by the whole thing, and they didn't like to talk about it, so I dropped it into conversation with an elderly neighbor who was not in any way affiliated with what happened at the time. I was informed that, while I was in the hospital, my grandmother, who has passed away, had confronted the family over what they had done during a time when it was still possible that I might have died. Their response had made my grandmother livid, and she had gone around telling everyone what they had said, which was essentially something to the effect of, "You should be thanking us. She'll be much safer now that she's had it. She'll have a more natural immunity now." To the neighbor's knowledge, nobody liked that, and for good reason. On top of that, parents didn't feel safe with them around, and there were other infants on the street who were my age or younger. People hurled abuse at them, he recalled, and they ended up leaving to stay with relatives before the house could even be sold. It was only recently that the extent of the abuse was relayed to me by another neighbor who may or may not have taken part in it at all. Their tires were slashed multiple times, almost as soon as they were replaced. Their car was keyed. When people weren't hurling abuse at them in the street, the worst of all being my grandmother, who had a razor-sharp wit, always being able to come up with something new and unique. They wrote handwritten letters calling them every obscene name under the sun and reminding them that they could be responsible for my death, posting them through their mailbox and sticking them to their windows and doors. The resident baseball boy, with the blessing of everyone present, tore their letterbox off their wall and smashed it in with a baseball bat. One of the residents on the street had a pair of cats, and when they brought any little presents home, she would scoop up the unfortunate prey with a shovel and leave them on their doorstep. This evolved to include the waste of the cats too, and another neighbor who had a dog decided to do the same with his dog's droppings. This would be done primarily when they were out of the house, and this was being done in the heat of summer. So you can only imagine the smell and cloud of flies that would be wafting around their porch when they returned hours later. The owner of the dog even went as far to smear the droppings all over their door handle and as much of their front window as he could, though people found this just a wee bit disgusting, so he stopped. While the abuse and letters kept up, people very quickly stopped leaving droppings and such on their porch or sticking the letters to their windows because, unfortunately, their young lad, who was about 7 or 8, got caught in the crossfire. Some of the older children caught on to the fact that their parents didn't like his family and began to bully him without really ever knowing why his family was hated so much, and this ended up reaching him at school. To their credit, they realized that he likely didn't understand what was going on, and it wasn't his fault, so they dialed it back a bit and kept the abuse to where only the parents could see. This family was so distressed that they took their son and ran to the sibling of one of the parents after the sibling of the other told them, quite frankly, that they didn't want their unvaccinated son around their children. The house was sold in their absence. I wondered aloud why the police weren't called because some of the perpetrators were very obvious, at which point I was informed that these people had an inherent distrust of any and all authority figures and held the belief that the system was against them. They were being oppressed and that the police would sweep it all under the rug, so they just left instead of exposing their son to the biased police, which is really baffling to me because in my country, their community is a majority and they'd be more likely to receive support. So, the moral of the story is to vaccinate your children, folks. You want me to stay in my lane? You got it, boss. Posted by Original Tank 5357. Some time ago, I used to work in a medical specialty office. It was ID, or infectious disease, as a medical assistant. Sidebar, I used to work in the food industry and was always told that I wouldn't ever contribute to society or do anything meaningful with my life. While I absolutely loved working as a chef and a baker at the time, I wanted to do more with my life, and I wanted to prove to myself that I'm not as useless as people made me out to be. Not that I believe that for 1 second, but in my culture, if you aren't a businessman or a doctor, you're lower than everyone else. It's pretty terrible, but that's how the culture is. I now live in the US, and it's been pretty good. Back to the story. I had graduated top 3 in my class and was certified through the AAMA and scored in the 90th percentile, so I knew my stuff. But I've never worked a white-collar job in my life, so I was afraid that I would seem, well, out of place. I did my externship at this ID clinic in my town, and they loved my interpersonal skills. They loved my work and stated that I would be offered a job at the end of my externship. I was elated. I was just so happy to have a job secured and to have a foot in the door to the medical field. It turns out my blue-collar experience had helped me relate with a lot of our patients, and they appreciated my work more for it. As my time went on, my experience working in the medical field became less about the money and more about the people that I can help with my direct patient care. They weren't just charts, MRNs, medical record number for those non-medical folk, and diagnoses. They were Jeff, who ran the local farmers market, or Meg, who worked with kids at the Y. I cared for my patients, and our repeats would always look forward to coming back to see me and have a chat. I loved working with my patients. So at the end of my externship, I was extended an offer of employment for a decent amount of money. It was more than my other classmates were offered at their practices, but still not a whole lot. And I took it. I was to be the medical assistant in charge of direct patient care. This meant checking in, rooming, dealing with prescriptions, performing and searching for labs, packing wounds, and doing dressing changes. Being officially part of the office now, I was determined to work my butt off and show myself and my colleagues that I could do it. I continued to do my work and care for patients. However, over time, I would notice certain things that weren't in my job duties that I could do that would help care for the patients. Certain things like calling their doctors for updated orders or checking for records from local hospitals. Also, helping patients find good home health or SNFs, which are skilled nursing facilities. It's generally, though, the medical scheduler's job. This also included looking into insurance coverage or billing and checking referral statuses for referral coordinators, among other things. Doing these tasks meant a bit more work on my end, but it also meant the best care that I could offer for my patients. This went on for a year, and my patients were happy and willing to come to appointments. Apparently, not a whole lot of people like to come to a building that has the words infectious diseases in big print on its side. Then one day, out of the blue, I'm called into my supervisor. Young, naive me thought, oh great, they finally see how hard I'm working and I'm finally getting recognized. Maybe they'll promote me to lead. Nope. My boss, Shelly, told me that I'm working too hard and sticking my fingers into too many pots. I asked where this was coming from, and she stated that I was staying more than 5 minutes late too many times, and it's because I'm doing too much work. She said, "We can't keep paying you all this overtime." I think I was maybe making 30 minutes of OT at most. She said that's still too much. I'm doing too much work. I was baffled, absolutely stunned. I thought I was doing the practice of service, but she undermined the entirety of the last year's hard work that I put in. I was frustrated and I was a bit upset, but I tried my best to remain professional. So I asked her what she would like me to do, and the next words out of her mouth were ones that she would come to regret. "Well, I see you're doing a lot of tasks that are meant for other positions. Maybe you should stop doing those and just stay in your lane." She then proceeded to write me up for trying to abuse the time clock. Insert a Jim Carrey, "Alrighty then," and cue malicious compliance. I asked her to send me a list of exactly what my job duties are, which she was happy to do. It listed most of what I originally was meant to do, except it didn't include dressing changes and packing wounds. I saw this and immediately knew this would be trouble for my boss. You see, she was the only other medical assistant on our end of the office that was certified to deal with minor wound care and dressings. At that point, since I was the main contact for patients, that would fall onto her plate. So I told each of my patients that I won't be doing any of that extra work because it goes against the practice's wishes, and I was told not to. All of them understood, but it's tough to get patients to keep appointments when things are delayed. Not long after the order was issued, I got my first page for a wound pack. Excellent. One thing to note about my boss is that she absolutely abhors feet. And one thing to note about infectious disease clinics is that we dealt with a lot of diabetic foot infections, at least 2 or 3 a day. Doc wants to see how it's healing, so he removes the wrap and unpacks the foot. Spent a little extra time with the patient and now has to get to his next appointment. I'm paged by the doc to pack the foot, wet to dry. "No problem, doc. Let me get Shelly for you." He then gives me a kind of odd look, but continues to his next appointment. Shelly gloves up, and as soon as she passes the threshold of the room and notices it's a diabetic foot, she's holding back her gags and immediately sweating. I pass by the room, and she asks for my help. As calmly as I could, I turned and said, "Sorry, boss, packing wounds isn't on my list. I can't do it, just staying in my lane. By the way, the 2 o'clock in 3 is a through and through foot infection. Probably should get that packed soon too." I'm glad we were wearing masks because she couldn't see the massive crap-eating grin that I had on my face throughout that whole encounter. She tried to write me up about disobeying superiors, but I'd spoken with my GM and she was behind me. Instead, she ended up getting written up for trying to put wound packs back on my list after she told me I did too much work. She ended up having to do part of the medical scheduler's job, part of the referral coordinator's job, and part of the billing office's job as she let go one of our front desk staff because there was not enough work to go around. There was plenty of work. I was doing it. She didn't last long after that. The burnout got to her and she stepped down from her supervisor position 4 months after that. They ended up hiring another super, and I left the practice shortly after that I got the vid. They told me to come back into work after 3 days, and still very symptomatic, so I told them I wouldn't endanger my patients like that and to shove it. Last I heard, they have an entirely new front office staff and they're perpetually short-handed. Shoulda let me drive my own path instead of staying in your silly lanes. Stop bothering us with that deadline. We've got this. Sure thing, kids. Posted by Rare Cheesecake 9701. Some background. I, 27 female, work in IT. I'm a well-respected and known member of the IT party circle where I live, so to speak. I am not jaw-dropping, but people know me and I have a very good reputation. One of the things is that I got to the point in my career when I wanted to give back, so I started mentoring others. Mostly, I mentored adults or those who are closer to me in age. Career advice, how to apply for different exchange programs that can boost their professional growth and improve their speaking and writing skills. The usual. But I always was one up for the challenge, and I decided to try and mentor kids. It's not a secret that IT and STEM are increasingly popular right now, and more people want to get into the field. Therefore, there are myriads of boot camps, hackathons, and mentoring programs for all ages. So, I signed up for one such program as a mentor. Teach kids how to code with blocks, tell them what AI is, and how to develop an MVP. It sounds more complicated than it might look at first glance, especially when you're an educated professional with a degree, explaining concepts that are rather complicated to children who may have less than 1/50th of your tech knowledge. I must add that participation in the said program gives kids credits and can help them get into better schools or even be eligible for some university scholarships later in life. So only pros, if you ask me. The only thing is that they must upload their MVP project to the site before the deadline. I was assigned 2 teams. Primary, which is early middle schoolers, Team A, and high schoolers, which is Team B. Both had 5 members, and the youngest in Team A was 8 years old. I thought, oh my goodness, that will be tough, thinking about Team A and how I am up for a tough time. Also, since they are so young, the parents of the kids must observe Team A meetings and my lessons, and parents equals problems. Ironically, despite my worries, even with help from the parents, the kids in Team A were doing great. But the same can't be said about Team B. A little side note, with my mentees, I have 2 rules. 1. At least 1 meeting per week. At least 50% of the group must be present. 2. Communication. When I type something, like task to do or reply to a question asked before, I ask my mentees to respond. Not even text. A thumbs up emoji will also suffice. We all know that red status doesn't mean much when you can accidentally open an app for a second or swipe it to clear RAM on the phone. So, Team A attended all the meetings and responded to my assignments. There was a curriculum provided by a program to follow, and they were very receptive overall. Team B started okay, but then started not showing on meetings and leaving assignments read but unresponded. I understand they have a lot on their plate, exams are no joke, but they disregarded my time, which I will not be okay with. I have a job to do, and mentoring in that program was 100% volunteering, and there was no payment for the mentors. There was, however, a very strict deadline. The middle of April, when their MVPs must be loaded onto the website for later judgment. I, even when ticked, am a professional first and an angry lady second. So I wrote multiple messages asking for updates on the project, with warnings at the end that deadline is April 15th, don't miss it. After one such message, the so-called leader of Team B, Sam, wrote to me this. Hi OP, I know that you probably mean well, but you only bother the team with those deadline messages. Can't you, chill out? When we need you, we'll contact you and all. Just get off our hair and, let us do our job. I'm sorry if this hurts your feelings. It is what it is, heart. After I read that message, I was like, what the heck? But I did respond that I would stop messaging if that caused tension within the team. Though the deadline is still on the 15th and the site would reject any application that was uploaded after. Just stop, okay? Jeez, said Sam to that, so I decided, okay, I'm washing my hands out of this. Cue malicious compliance. Since that message, I haven't written anything to Team B. I had scheduled no meetings, updates, or checkups about the curriculum and their understanding, and definitely not a written reminder of the deadline once. Deadline came. Team A uploaded their project with no issues, and their parents even bought me a nice box of chocolate as a thank you gesture. Just like the deadline came and went, Team B started bombarding chat, asking me to help because something is wrong with the site. We can't upload our project. I entered the chat and said, yes, it will not upload. No, it's not an issue with the site. The deadline has passed, so if you try to upload, it will only show you an error message. I warned you, kids. No extra credits. No nothing. The rules of that program are simple, but they are hard, no exceptions ones. Team B tried to blame me, saying that as a mentor, it was my job to ensure that they would succeed. And I reminded them that my job as a mentor is to provide support and guidance, keep track of their progress, and to remind them of the deadline, which, all of the above, they, via Sam, asked me not to. And since I respected their boundaries, I did exactly what they had requested. They can sulk as much as they want. I have all our communication in writing, so they don't have a leg to stand on when trying to accuse me of sabotaging them and their program. Haha. Tough luck, kids. Psycho Karen neighbor destroys property and files a false police report with an update. Click the video on your screen to find out what happens to Karen, and I'll see you there.